Jimmy Kimmel just got canceled. Antifa is now a terrorist organization, and anyone not singing Charlie Kirk's praises is not going to have a good time. Right? And all of this is connected to Kimmel's show on Monday night, where in his monologue he said,
"We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half-staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They've just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction.
Right, immediately you had right-wing influencers and activists slamming Kimmel in general, but especially for his words about MAGA trying to cast Kirk's killer as, quote, anything other than one of them in order to score political points. And you had many of them basically accusing Kimmel of just flat out lying. Or saying that Kimmel was essentially saying that the killer was actually MAGA. But at the same time, you had people defending Kimmel saying he wasn't saying that the killer was MAGA, but rather that MAGA was more focused on trying to point blame. And then, of course, in addition to that, you had people who had issue with how he was talking about Donald Trump and his reaction to Charlie Kirk's death. But in any case there, one of the people that did not like Kimmel's comments was right-wing commentator Benny Johnson. And so then with that, to talk about Kimmel, Johnson had on his podcast none other than Brendan Carr, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. Right? And you had Carr, again, the chair of the FCC, claiming that Kimmel's remarks were part of a concerted effort to lie to the American people and that the FCC had what he called remedies that it would be looking into.
Frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead.
And then you had Carr urging local TV stations affiliated with ABC to push back, with a key point being that as FCC chair, Carr has real power over broadcast licenses granted to these TV stations by the federal government.
Frankly, I think that it's really sort of past time that a lot of these licensed broadcasters themselves push back on Comcast and Disney and say, listen, we are going to preempt, we are not going to run Kimmel anymore until you straighten this out, because we licensed broadcaster are running the possibility of fines or license revocations from the FCC if we continue to run content that ends up being a pattern of news distortion.
And then, wouldn't you know it, shortly after that, Nexstar, which is an owner of ABC affiliate stations around the country, they say they're going to preempt Kimmel's program for, quote, the foreseeable future. And then Sinclair, another owner of many local TV stations, they say they're also going to suspend Kimmel's program. And also, they called on Kimmel to apologize and make what they called a meaningful personal donation to Kirk's family and his Turning Point USA. But of course, ABC, they're the one that's going to make the decision here. And what you ended up seeing is a short time later, they made the announcement that they'd be pulling Kimmel off the air indefinitely. And while the company, which is owned by Disney and has already paid $15 million to settle a defamation lawsuit with Trump, did not explain their reasoning publicly, you had Rolling Stone reporting that multiple execs felt that Kimmel had actually not said anything over the line, but the threat of Trump administration retaliation loomed. Also, fun little thing, Nexstar, they recently announced that they plan to acquire a rival company in a $6.2 billion deal, which is a deal that will be under scrutiny from the FCC. And of course it brings back into mind CBS, who over the summer, the FCC approved a major merger involving CBS's owner Paramount, but only after one, CBS agreed to pay $16 million to settle another lawsuit filed by Trump, and two, they canceled the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, though of course the network claimed that the decision was just financially motivated. Though important to note there, Trump was not a fan of Colbert, there were some concerns there, and in fact, when Colbert got canceled, Trump celebrated on social media saying, "I hear Jimmy Kimmel is next." And in fact, after this went down with Kimmel, you had him celebrating again, writing, "Great news for America, the ratings challenge Jimmy Kimmel show is canceled. That leaves Jimmy and Seth, two total losers on fake news NBC." Right, and with this, we've seen many people celebrating along with their president. Are you people saying they were happy that Jimmy Kimmel was being held accountable? Are you saying that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequences? But really quickly, that's the news. This part's gonna be my opinion. It is very hard to look at this situation and see it as anything other than a blatant attack on free speech. But if you look out right now, there are a lot of so-called free speech warriors and anti-cancel culture people that are out rejoicing that the government appears to have pressured a company to punish and shut down a TV host over something he said. And it seems to show that a lot of times for many of those people, it's not actually about having principles and beliefs around freedom of speech and often other freedoms, but really about wanting power, control, and getting what they think is a warranted revenge. In fact, sometimes you'll see people online saying, "It's our turn." Right? And let me be clear when I'm talking with you here. If a company reaches the conclusion to get rid of people on their own, Cool, that's the free market. But when it's obviously because they don't want to deal with government harassment and threats, or they want to get preferential treatment, or they need merger approval, that is a very, very different thing. That is a scary thing. They want you scared. They want you to shut up and obey in advance. Please don't. Please do not, right? Use your voice while you can, because it's not going to get easier to speak out tomorrow. You will be next. It's just a matter of time. Oh, and finally, let me say, any of these I really care about free speech podcast bros that help get Trump elected, if you're silent here, you're full of shit, whether it be Joe Rogan or any of these fucking guys. They know who they are. Right, and so then newscap back on. In addition to people who were celebrating this move along with President Trump, you had others calling it out. Right, Obama tweeting after years of complaining about cancel culture, the current administration has taken it to a new and dangerous level by routinely threatening regulatory action against media companies unless they muzzle or fire reporters and commentators it doesn't like. And adding that media companies need to start standing up rather than capitulating to it. You also had Representative Eric Swalwell tweeting, "Get a lawyer, Brendan Carr, and save your documents. In a Dem majority, your ass is going to be in a witness chair for a long time. It's all coming out, all of your corrupt deals." Right? And then in addition to that, you had people sharing that footage of Fox commentator Brian Kilmeade calling for mentally ill and homeless people to be killed, right? Arguing that Kimmel essentially got threatened out for what he said, but with the Fox host, he wasn't threatened. He was allowed to apologize and just move on. And that is, you had others saying things like trying to imagine the reaction if the Biden administration had demanded that Fox fire Greg Gutfeld because he wasn't sufficiently sad about the assault on Paul Pelosi. So there, notably, you had comedian Roseanne Barr responding sarcastically saying, yeah, imagine an administration putting pressure on a television channel to fire a comedian they didn't like. Because if you didn't know, back in 2018, her show got dropped after there was massive backlash to a racist tweet that she posted about a senior advisor to former President Obama, with her then being an unverified rumor that Michelle Obama had gotten ABC to make that happen. The one, we don't know if that's true, and two, as others have pointed out, Obama was not president at the time. Trump was. And in fact, this whole situation has gotten to such a place, you have people finding themselves surprised to be agreeing with Tucker Carlson.
You hope that Charlie Kirk's death won't be used by a group we now call bad actors to create a society that was the opposite of the one he worked to build. You hope that. You hope that a year from now, the turmoil we're seeing in the aftermath of his murder won't be leveraged to bring hate speech laws to this country. And trust me, if it is, if that does happen, there is never a more justified moment for civil disobedience than that, ever.
Right, now with that, I got to point out, Carlson is not talking about Kimmel there, right? He's more responding to Pam Bondi saying that she would prosecute hate speech, which is something that sparked a lot of conservative backlash against her, despite Trump clearly also being on board. Right, he even threatened to go after an ABC News reporter who asked him about it.
We'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart. Maybe they'll come after ABC. Well, ABC paid me $16 million recently for a form of hate speech, right? Your company paid me $16 million for a form of hate speech. So maybe they'll have to go after you.
Now with that, Bondi has walked it back, though a lot of other stuff is still moving forward, including Trump announcing that he is designating Antifa a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization, and adding, I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. And you have many alarmed and also confused, right? Because Antifa is not a single group. It's short for anti-fascist, and it's more like a movement or maybe an umbrella term for various far left-leaning activist groups. And in fact, this isn't even a new idea. In 2020, when Trump first floated the idea of designated Antifa as a terrorist organization, you had former FBI Director Christopher Wray testifying that it's an ideology, not an organization. Right? Wray saying that it didn't have the type of hierarchy structure that would usually allow it to be designated as a terror group by the federal government. And then with that, point number two is that there's no legal mechanism for labeling purely domestic organizations as terrorist groups anyways. Instead, the law allows the government to make a list of foreign terrorist organizations to which it's illegal to give money or material support. And so you have experts saying that efforts to target a domestic movement like Antifa, it would likely run up against the First Amendment and other legal issues. And then also, even if that wasn't the case, there's little evidence to suggest that Antifa terrorism is a major threat like Trump's describing. But according to data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, attacks from left-wing perpetrators, including Antifa, make up a small percentage of overall terrorist attacks and casualties in the US. And in fact, 57% of attacks over the study period were perpetrated by right-wing terrorists. And so with that, it's why you have so many people worried that Antifa, it's really just going to be used as a catch-all term for any left-wing organization or any kind of thing that stands in Trump's way. And all of this, is we've all seen, even if some court ultimately says, hey, that's 100% illegal, a lot of damage can be done in the meantime and even afterward. Now, that said, you still had Republicans coming out in support, including Senator Bill Cassidy, for example, saying in a statement, Antifa seized upon a movement of legitimate grievances to promote violence and anarchy, working against justice for all. The president is right to recognize the destructive role of Antifa by designating them domestic terrorists. With many saying Cassidy might be going hard in the paint here as a way to try to make up for the fact that he had to go against RFK yesterday. Right, but that brings us to Congress, because with all the fallout from Kirk's murder, there's been a lot happening on that front as well, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, for example, getting ready to force a vote on a resolution honoring Kirk. And I say force because the Democrats do not seem too thrilled about it. Or with one, for example, telling Axios, people are worried that we're being totally set up because anything short of a unanimous vote could be a rallying cry for Republicans. But as far as what the resolution itself looks like, it eulogizes Kirk as a devoted Christian and a courageous American patriot, declaring Charlie Kirk personified the values of the First Amendment, exercising his God-given right to speak freely, challenge prevailing narratives, and did so with honor, courage, and respect for his fellow Americans. While Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries isn't planning on telling Democrats on how to vote, you had Representative Crockett already saying she's planning to vote no, saying she's not sure what is honorable about Kirk's past statements. Right, and that is, she's not the only Democrat potentially in the center of a controversy right now. Right, just yesterday, Representative Ilhan Omar narrowly escaped being censured by the House when she said after Kirk's death,
Charlie was someone who once said, guns save lives after a school shooting. Charlie was someone who was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police.
I think he called him a scumbag.
Right, have no regard, downplay slavery and what Black people have gone through in this country.
Right, and then she reposted this clip on Twitter.
Don't be fooled. These people don't give a single shit about Charlie Kirk. They are just using his death to further their Christo-fascist agenda. And before I continue, I need to say that this revisionist history about who Kirk was is just as perplexing. Kirk was a reprehensible human being. He enacted his political agenda by preying upon weak-minded people. He took complex socioeconomic issues and simplified them by pointing fingers at outgroups, demonizing those groups, and then sicking his massive following on them. He was a stochastic terrorist, an adamant transphobe. He denied the genocide happening in Palestine. He believed in the subjugation of women, and with his last dying words, he was spewing racist dog whistles. Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein, and his monster shot him through the neck. And all of that said, none of us should want to live in a society where these types of killings become the norm.
But then Nancy Mace filing the resolution to censure Omar, which would have stripped her of her committee assignments, and she said, you celebrated his murder and now you're scrambling to save face. You didn't condemn political violence, you glorified it and you got caught. Of course, to be clear, Omar did condemn Kirk's murder, and also something that you've seen more and more people saying in general is that there's often little distinction being drawn between those who condemned the assassination of Kirk, but were also critical of things that he said, and those who actually celebrate. But in any case, what you had was the House voting 214 to 213 to dismiss the resolution, meaning that 4 Republicans joined Democrats in voting in favor of Omar. And so with that, you had people like Representative Mike Flood of Nebraska saying, this is a First Amendment issue. We may not like or agree with what someone says, but that does not mean we should deny their First Amendment right. But then you had Mace accusing him and the other dissenting Republicans of selling out. And then all of this is on the flip side. You had Democrats today introducing new legislation that Schumer says is intended to protect free speech in the wake of the Trump administration's attacks on it. But for now, that is where we are with everything. We're gonna have to wait to see how things play out. I think this is gonna be a very interesting weekend. So with all of this, yes, the Philip DeFranco show is a daily news show, but I also want it to be a conversation. I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts, opinions, and reactions on all of this, including what's happening with Kimmel?